Howdy, I'm Andrew Nosler.
And I'm Zach Knoll. We're here to talk to you about how Montana can take advantage of increasingly cheaper and more efficient renewable technology to transition away from fossil fuels and strengthen Montana's economy.
First, we're going to talk to you guys about who owns the grid. Montana electric consumers are serviced by 31 distribution utilities, 2 investor-owned utilities, 25 rural electric cooperatives, 3 federal agencies, and 1 municipality. Montana's energy grid is extremely complex, widely dispersed, and controlled by a diverse set of investors, making it really tough to regulate and even tougher to implement consistent policy over.
This map shows the distribution of Montana's generating facilities. We can see that the majority of our hydroelectric generation takes place in the western mountainous region of the state, while wind generation is most prominent in the midwestern region spanning the state north to south. We don't see an overwhelming coal and gas presence over here by Bozeman or Missoula. However, when we move out east past Billings, we start to see coal plants such as Colstrip and natural gas wells popping up, especially near the Crow Reservation. While electricity production in Montana is controlled by many different parties, there are 3 main players with outsized roles in the means of distributing this energy. Looking at this map of Montana's transmission infrastructure, we can see that Montana is part of both America's western grid as well as its eastern grid. On the east side of Montana, the Western Area Power Administration, or WAPA, has a natural monopoly on the means of distributing energy to Montana consumers. Looking to the western portion of the state, transmission infrastructure starts to get a bit messier, with many different companies controlling lines. However, referencing the map, we can see the 2 most prominent players in the western section of the state are Northwestern Energy as well as the Bonneville Power Administration, or BPA. It is true that Northwestern Energy has a relative monopoly on transmission infrastructure in some sections of the state. However, when it comes to energy production, the reality is that they actually only produce 15% of the state's energy. In 2015, investor-owned utilities were responsible for 48% of the electricity sales in Montana, cooperatives 29%, federal agencies 3%, and power marketers 19%. Looking at this graph comparing the sources of electric generation in Montana, we can see that an overwhelming majority of our energy comes from 2 sources: hydroelectric dams and coal plants. 55% of electric generation in Montana comes from coal and 34% comes from hydropower. One of the biggest difficulties in achieving a transition to renewable energy in the state of Montana will be phasing out that coal generation. Because it gobbles up such a large share of our current production, there are a lot of moneyed interests as well as political players wary of disrupting the status quo. Luckily, developments in renewable technologies have the potential to force their hands. The levelized cost of electricity production, which takes into account construction costs, fuel costs, and operational costs for different electric generation fuel sources, shows a promising economic future for renewables. Over the last decade, the cost of producing wind and solar energy has gone down by 70 to 89%. The cost of producing coal is $109 per megawatt hour. Solar and wind respectively cost $40 and $41, while gas costs $56 per megawatt hour to produce. As wind and solar continue to increase the gap by which they outpace fossil fuels in terms of efficiency and cost savings, the argument that fossil fuels are at all viable will continue to weaken, and eventually institutional players will be unable to ignore the detrimental monetary implications of preserving the status quo.
Let's see what people on the ground in Montana are doing to facilitate a clean, green transition.
OnSite Solar is a PV solar installation company out of Bozeman which specializes in implementing renewable energy projects of varying size across the state of Montana. They hope to provide a model and proof of concept for the future possibility of small-scale and personalized solar installations across the state.
Held v. State is a class action suit moving up through the Montana state judicial system fighting for action on behalf of future generations against climate change. This case is building off the mission of Juliana versus the United States, which was a federal case action suing on the same grounds as Held. The young people in Montana and the United States are waking up to the reality of a broken earth which lies ahead and are taking action to repair it.
Colstrip Power Plant, due to political pressures and state judicial rulings, is closing 2 of its massively polluting generators by 2022. This shutdown is moving in the right direction, but raises concerns about future actions that should be imposed on current fossil fuel producers. Demand for cleanup of solid waste sites is increasing, and companies in charge of plants such as Colstrip are building their legal teams to combat lawsuits requiring intense reparations. Recently, the Montana Department for Environmental Quality reached a settlement with Talon Energy to undertake a $163 million cleanup project at the Colstrip ash ponds. These ash ponds store the byproduct of burning coal, which is leftover ash. Unfortunately, this contaminates the ecosystem and can infiltrate groundwater, making it toxic for drinking and agricultural uses. Not only is this an important precedent for holding companies responsible for the externalities of fossil fuel production, but cleanup projects like this could be a huge producer for jobs in the state.
Now we're going to talk about the way the politics are moving around this issue. Coal plants nationwide are shutting down. Demand for renewable energy standards is increasing, and companies and government agencies alike are building a shared sentiment against fossil fuels and for clean energy. Montana doesn't want to be left behind, and in order to move with the times in a sustainable direction, action is required immediately.
Some political figures in Montana have a generally positive attitude towards implementing pro-climate legislation. We reached out to John Tester and his energy policy expert for an interview. However, as you can see, they did not get back to us. Tester supports broad assurances and generally votes in favor of plans to combat climate change. He has an 88% pro-climate rating from the League of Conservation Voters, a site which grades members of Congress based off of their voting records. However, when it comes to specific energy issues in Montana, Tester tends to defend fracking and oil interests within the state. For example, Tester voted in favor of approving the Keystone XL pipeline, which would transport the world's dirtiest oil from Canada through eastern Montana and onto the Gulf of Mexico, as well as voted against an amendment which would ensure fracking processes are subject to regulation under the Safe Drinking Water Act. While Tester is not perfect, he has been pretty instrumental in drafting the bipartisan infrastructure bill moving through Congress via his roles on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, as well as his Appropriations Committee. On the other hand, Steve Daines is a bane to pro-climate legislation, striking down nearly any substantial legislation. Daines has a 7% score from the League of Conservation Voters, ranking him among the worst in the nation. He seeks to preserve a Montanan culture built around fossil fuels. As recently as February 2021, Daines voted to explicitly expand the use of natural gas and fossil fuels nationwide by voting for an amendment which would prohibit the EPA and CEQ from proposing rules or guidance that would ban fracking in the U.S., as well as voting for an amendment which would create a deficit-neutral reserve fund to expand the use and availability of natural gas as a viable fuel source.
Now we're going to talk about some of the potential Montana has for renewable energy. Wind energy in Montana has the potential to generate 679,000 megawatts of electricity annually, ranking Montana second in the nation for total potential wind energy. Solar energy in Montana has a very competitive opportunity compared with other states. Due to the nature of photovoltaic units operating more efficiently in the cold, Montana solar projects have a bright future. However, our solar availability is not obviously as abundant as California, Nevada, or Arizona. It's still viable. Let's talk about hydroelectric. Because annual precipitation is variable and difficult to predict, solid metrics indicating hydroelectric potential for our state are hard to come by. However, Montana currently has a hydroelectric capacity of 2,645 megawatts. This could naturally be expanded and better utilized with a more robust electrified grid. Now we're going to talk about some barriers to renewable energy. The need for expanded transmission infrastructure is paramount. There are distribution lines and transmission lines making up a grid. A distribution line, which would go directly to homes or buildings, can hold only about 69 kilovolts or less of energy. Transmission lines in Montana hold anywhere between 130 and 500 kilovolts of available energy. A kilovolt is a measurement of energy storage, and a kilowatt is a measurement of energy output or use. An example to contextualize the application of kilovolts here: large appliances, such as washing and drying machines, individually require 0.2 kilovolts of available energy for use. If a transmission or distribution line is spread across tens or hundreds of households, larger storage within the grid is necessary to counteract the lack of immediately available energy provided by fossil fuels. We need a better storage system for energy, and we need better batteries or energy storage facilities in order to facilitate our transition to renewables.
In 2015, the federal government, as well as state governments, combined to pay fossil fuel producers a whopping $20.5 billion in subsidies just to keep them burning fossil fuels. A continuation of this policy will greatly hinder a transition to renewable energy, as these subsidies artificially provide fossil fuels with a chance to remain competitive in regards to production costs.
Due to the rate of return system for utility infrastructure development, which allows utilities to be compensated with interest for infrastructure which they build, utility companies are incentivized to produce less efficient systems, which cost more and thus increase the total sum of dollars paid back to the utilities by taxpayers. This naturally incentivizes construction of fossil fuel plants and accompanying utilities, which are far less efficient than renewables. So, the current system we have for paying back our utilities de-incentivizes renewables.
Hey class of 2070, I have some questions for you. Can you still ski at Bridger? Does Yellowstone still have the last pure bison herd in the world? Is MSU still Trout U? Does the Gallatin still flow clean year-round? How about your summers? Can you go outside and enjoy the fresh, clean mountain air that Montana has to offer? If you answered no to any of these questions, then I am sorry, because we have failed you. You are missing out on the things that made Bozeman such an incredible place in the early parts of the century, and you have a right to be angry about that. Right now, there is a fight for the future of our country and our world taking place. Fossil fuel titans such as Exxon and BP Oil and investment firms like BlackRock are lobbying heavily against pro-climate legislation and attempts to hold these polluters responsible for the environmental destruction they knowingly caused. Our politicians are sitting on their hands and allowing corporatist members of Congress to remove climate provisions one by one from the most comprehensive legislation of our time. There is virtually no major financial institution or governmental body in the world which is 100% committed to our side. Yet everyday people are continuing to fight the climate crisis because they don't know what else to do. For us, this is an existential threat, and we cannot bear the idea of letting down future generations as the generations before us have. Regardless of our success in this fight, I ask your generation to learn from the mistakes of the past and understand that our failures can be a lesson leading to your success. Every issue that faces us today and in the future can be solved through collective action. The world is run by those who show up, and right now, not enough people are making their voices heard. So if you take away anything from this video, I ask that it's this. Don't feel nihilistic about the powers you are up against. Get involved with local organizations and see what you can do to turn your passion into action and drive change. Real institutional transformations can only take place when the people decide to truly govern themselves.
Hey class of 2070, nice of you to stop by. I want to say that I feel guilty that I have enjoyed the natural beauty of Mother Earth and left you none. My generation knows what mankind is doing to the earth, and we know what must be done to save it. Assuming you're standing in a sweater, organizing your ski gear, and packing up your fly rods, my point is thankfully moot. However, assuming you are worried about crop yield this year and mass loss of biodiversity, then I need to remind you who to blame. I ask that you reflect with intense criticism on the wealthy and powerful of my generation. These people know that climate change is real. These people know the scale of this threat. These people know that they are dooming the future, and they know they are doing nothing to fix it. Their drive to have a legacy of grace and wealth and elegance is blinding them from what really matters. Their legacy is all that you can control now. Do not give them the legacy they want. I ask you to make their negligence the foundation of their legacy. Whether or not we rise to the challenge and repair our broken world, do not forget who fought on what side. Do not forget who filled your skies with soot. Do not forget who slaughtered the fish in your seas. And do not forget who funded this exploit of this beautiful planet we call home. Do not forget who knowingly wronged you. These people are evil, acting on interest of money and power at your expense. I am sorry, and I hope more than anything that you get to experience the same beautiful world as I, the world which I am slowly watching die before my eyes.